Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is David Longoria. I'm the Director of Community Impact with LISC's Community Research and Impact Team, and it's truly a privilege to welcome you to this conversation marking the launch of LISC's Heirs Property Playbook. We're grateful to be joined by colleagues from across the country, local practitioners, legal partners, housing leaders, public sector officials, community organizations, and advocates, all of whom understand that this issue sits at the intersection of housing stability, wealth preservation, and community resilience. Heirs property is often described as a technical legal issue, which it is, but in reality, it is deeply human. It affects families' ability to stay in homes passed down across generations, to access credit and repair assistance, to recover from disasters, and to maintain a foothold in neighborhoods they helped build. At a national scale, the implications are enormous, but the real impact is measured family by family, property by property, and community by community. We're also at a moment where multiple forces are converging: aging housing stock, climate and disaster recovery pressures, escalating property values, growing displacement risks, and widening wealth gaps. All of these make unresolved title issues more consequential than ever. So today is not just about launching a publication, it's about strengthening a field of practice. The Heirs Property Playbook we're releasing today is one tool of many. It's not a silver bullet by any means. It reflects lessons learned across LISC's network and from partners like the National Consumer Law Center, local governments, legal aid organizations, and community-based leaders doing this work on the ground. We see it as a framework for coordination, a practical guide for implementation, a resource for building partnerships, and most importantly, a living document that will continue evolving as new lessons emerge. We've designed today's session to be learning-oriented and practice-informed. You'll hear from legal experts, local implementers, housing leaders, and public sector partners who are actively navigating these challenges. And we also hope this is the beginning of an ongoing conversation, not the end point. Before we continue, I want to encourage you to use the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. If you have questions that arise as speakers present, we'll do our best to surface these and any themes during the Q&A portion later. With that, it's my pleasure to turn things over to my colleague, David Greenberg, Vice President of LISC's Community Research and Impact, who will formally introduce the playbook and talk about what we mean by the role of a local quarterback in this work. David, over to you.
Thank you so much, David. Yes, I'm Vice President for Community Research and Impact at LISC National. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. It is my pleasure to very briefly introduce this playbook before we turn to local and national experts on how they are putting it into practice. So, as David said, this is a resource that is aimed at community quarterbacks. So those are organizations who really want to bring together different stakeholders who can expand the reach and impact of place-based approaches to heirs property. So who can be a quarterback? Depending on the context, it can be local government, legal services organizations, or community-based organizations, even intermediaries like LISC, with the ability to coordinate between legal services, outreach functions, and data functions. Quarterbacks deliver new resources, they build trust, they navigate systems, and they collaboratively manage for impact. So without further ado, let me share for everybody a link to the playbook. And I'll screen share right now just to share some functions, hoping that folks can see that. So first, this is a resource that we hope that local practitioners will use for case making and fundraising purposes for this mobilized and comprehensive approach to heirs property that we'll describe in a moment. So it starts with a definition of what heirs property is.
And David, we're actually not seeing your screen as of yet. just so you know.
Oh, thank you. How about that?
Okay, now I think it is coming
Yep,
up.
we
Yes, there.
got you.
I appreciate that. Okay, great. So we start with a definition of Ayers property and why it is a problem. So I'm going to scroll down gently about that. Why Ayers property matters. And then it provides a broad framework that describes how quarterbacks can bring together different stakeholders based on LISC's experience in Jacksonville. This is a process of finding, engaging, and supporting vulnerable heirs. Then we move to, a 6-point high-level common sense strategy that involves understanding local context, identifying priority areas, the generation of referral pathways, and then outreach strategies, partner deployment, and tracking sustainability and tracking progress. So within each of these pathways, there are downloadable and adaptable resources that are drawn from different sources, such as grant agreements, outreach materials, and workflows, as well as case studies, sample metrics, and different examples of various kinds of funder models. So, as David said, this is meant to be a collaborative and living document. So there's also an opportunity to share your own resources and add to the field's collective knowledge. So we hope you explore this on your own time. Just want to say we're very grateful to JPMC for supporting the research with the caveat that its findings do not necessarily represent the views of the organization. To co-authors, Christopher Smith, David Longoria, our designer, Astrid Lewis Reed, and of course to local practitioners within the 20 plus city and rural LISC cohort who have already started to use and test this approach. So I'm going to turn it over now to Sarah Bowling-Mancini of the National Consumer Law Center to give an overview of the legal landscape and the role of legal services partners in this comprehensive approach.
Thank you, David. And I must share my own excitement about the playbook being live and online. I believe LISC has done a tremendous service to this community by coalescing these materials and shared learnings in one place. And really, it should be a helpful jumping off point for folks who are getting into this work anew, and even for people who have been engaging in it. I think when we share these learnings with each other, we can bring the practice forward and really advance all of our shared goals. So just to add a little bit of context here about why this work matters and why intersectional work on heirs property matters. And I think that's really what the playbook demonstrates, is how bringing different stakeholders together can be the most meaningful way and perhaps the most impactful way to approach the issue. Heirs property intersects with so many areas of housing vulnerability. We know that owners of heirs property and inherited homes, that this represents one important source of current, already existing affordable housing. And that when we talk about preserving affordable housing and addressing the racial wealth gap, that preservation is so important. So both along the lines of affordable housing, when it comes to access to disaster relief and recovery, and preventing other causes of home loss like property tax foreclosure, mortgage foreclosure, targeting by predatory investors. These are all issues that arise in the heirs property context, and to which we know owners of inherited homes are even more vulnerable to these various forms of home loss. So, what I think the playbook represents and really demonstrates or shows is how a quarterback can come into a community or activate resources that are in a community, both from legal services providers, community based organizations, local government players, and a range of other community stakeholders, and thinking about how do we do effective outreach? How do we inform people about the risk that heirs property can present and protecting that property from loss, and then moving from protection to resolution of that tangled title, clouded ownership, as we often say, and then prevention, and all of these different aspects of the work. When it comes to effective legal partnerships, one thing that we believe is very important at the National Consumer Law Center, and we've been actively partnering with LISC and CRI on these initiatives, is fundamentally, when it comes to resolving title issues, you have to have a lawyer involved or lawyers involved. There must be a legal provider involved. And it's really helpful and important if that legal provider can be identified upfront before a community-based org or entity is even applying for funding. Because if you don't have a legal provider lined up, it's not going to be possible to ultimately do the work that you intend to do. And those legal partners have particular ways of operating that may not always be obvious to others in the space. I know that we previously did a webinar with NCLC and LISC about the kind of CDFI and legal services world and how both of these worlds are operating in some of the same spaces, but we don't often talk to each other. So legal services programs have a particular vocabulary, a particular set of rules that they're used to operating under. And so I just want to highlight a few of those points for awareness so that folks will be thinking about this as you are looking for a legal partner if you're engaging in or ramping up one of these efforts. So first of all, it's important to look for legal partners who can help with outreach and community engagement. But of course, when you have a quarterback in play, they can also bring in community-based organizations and other providers who can help with that outreach effort. When it comes to legal services organizations, some of them are better at outreach than others. And so you want to identify, is that a strength? And how, if not, how do we supplement that? How do we make sure we're going to have effective outreach? The other important point to note is when you're looking for a legal provider, oftentimes a legal services or legal aid program will make the most sense for doing this work. I think what we have seen in programs around the country is that it's usually more cost effective to have a legal aid or legal services program than to use private lawyers. And it usually provides more scope or capacity to use a legal services program versus pro bono individual volunteer lawyers. And when I say legal services, these are nonprofit organizations. You'll find at least one of these programs in every city in the country. Many of them are funded by the Legal Services Corporation, LSC, and some of them are not. And they also pull in a number of other sources of funding from foundations and from the local private bar and things like that. Just a few things that these legal services providers think about when they're doing this work. Many of them, or most of them, will have a background in both real estate law and probate law, so they have that knowledge base. They also have the experience representing low-income people and low-income homeowners. And the other thing that you'll typically find is that they have other departments within their program that can provide other services that might come up. So in addition to a home ownership team and perhaps a senior citizens unit or a probate and estate planning unit, they will usually have a public benefits unit that can understand how public benefits might be impacted by issues involved in inheriting land or property. They will also have a disability rights unit sometimes, or a unit that deals with family law or protection from family violence. So it really allows this wraparound service that is so important for low-income clients. Keep in mind that when it comes to working with legal services programs, they are going to have a concept of a client that is usually a single person, and they have to run conflicts checks when they open a new case, when they're going to form a lawyer-client relationship. So if you've got a family with multiple family members and they're all on the same page, still the legal services provider will usually have to pick one person who's going to be their client, and they have to think carefully about who is their client in order to not end up in a potential conflict. They also have to think about confidentiality obligations that lawyers have. And so when it comes to grant reporting, they may not be able to provide specific details about individual clients by name or address. Those things may have to be anonymized because they have this duty of confidentiality. And they also have income eligibility rules. Most legal services programs, especially if they have federal funding, can only go up to either 175% or 200% of the federal poverty level. And that may be true even if they get other funding that's not restricted. They may have an overall income cap, which is okay because there are still plenty of households to serve that are going to be under those income limits, but it's important to be aware of. And finally, my last note at this point is just to mention that timing can matter when you're ramping up work on heirs property. And I think through many of the tools that are in the playbook, if a legal services program is going to increase their capacity in order to take on this work, they may have to shift a staff attorney from one unit to another, or they may want to hire a new person. And when it comes to hiring, oftentimes there is a sweet spot of, summer into, August, September is a good time frame for hiring people who are coming out of law school, have taken the bar exam, but it takes some amount of planning for them to be able to get that ready and be able to hire in time to start serving clients. So I'll go ahead and leave it there and turn it back to you all.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that essential framing. We've heard about the legal landscape and the structural challenges. Now we really want to shift towards practice, what it actually takes to stand this work up locally. So to guide us through that conversation, I'm pleased to introduce Christopher Smith, LISC's National Heirs Property Practice Lead, who will moderate a panel bringing together perspectives from local implementation, legal partnership, and public sector innovation. Christopher, I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Yeah, thanks, David. And we've got a fantastic panel. So I'm going to move right into starting to pepper folks with questions after sharing a quick intros. Who do we have here? Local implementer, my colleague in Richmond, Virginia, Jonathan Atkins Tazwell, has led the local work in Richmond, Virginia. We're going to have him chime in. Second, we've got a legal partner, which you just heard from, Sarah Mancini. Going to ask Sarah again to weigh in on a few areas that have cropped up as we've heard from partners all over the country. And last, Colin Delargy. Hope I'm saying that right, Colin Delargy, in the city of Atlanta, in the mayor's office. And I know there's a particular perspective around municipal government and how do you think about this work. So actually, I think I'm going to start with Colin and go to this question of partnership. Sarah, you brought it up. So, Colin, where do partnerships matter most early on in this sort of heirs program development and startup?
Yeah, great, Christopher, and thanks everyone. Hi, I'm Colin Delargy, and I am the Assistant Director of Strategy here for the Housing Innovation Lab in the City of Atlanta. We're part of the Mayor's Office, so right in the administration here at the city. I think, I like the framing that the LISC playbook has of kind of identify, engage, and support, and so partnerships for all three of those. One of the earliest things that we did in terms of partnerships is partner with existing funding providers, existing partners, existing organizations to basically say, where do you see heirs property? And actually, it kind of went the other direction. We met with them to say, hey, how can we help you improve your program? From the municipal government, we often don't run the programs, but we often support others, at least here in Atlanta. So other public authorities, other nonprofits, either with funding or with coordination or just getting a meeting together. And so we said, what do y'all need to run your programs? And it was a lot of owner-occupied rehabilitation program providers that first flagged for us. We keep having to say no to people because of Tangle Title. And that flagged for us, like, okay, great. Then this is where we start. One, to understand why, but once we understand why and talk with the program administrators and the like, now we have a list of people that they had to say no to. So we immediately can go and like reach people, identify, and start to tell some of those framing conversations. So, where is this happening? In Atlanta, almost everything has some kind of geographic expression. So which parts of the city are affected more than others? And a lot of that initial stuff came from those partnerships, especially, and I know LISC, I know down in Jacksonville, y'all have worked on this a lot. The data for heirs property is incomplete. And oftentimes you're having to use other types of data sources to get at the heart of the matter. So it's been helpful to have partners in the first order to just, they know kind of what they're looking at because they're actually hands-on working with people. There's other partnership things too, but I'll pause for a second there.
No, that's terrific. So definitely want to come back to that question. I think that's going to be a thread through in all of this is where might there be opportunities to attach or bundle the heirs work with existing programs. Have the privilege of sitting in the office of our historic Eastside CDC in Jacksonville, Florida today, where they're doing a bunch of different things around preservation, neighborhood stabilization, and one of the things they've been able to do is integrate this notion of heirs and what are the signals they're looking for that suggest potential vulnerability. So, terrific point. I'm going to now go to Jonathan and ask Jonathan to come off mute. And I think, Jonathan, the question of trust has been one that's been an underpinning in some early wins around your program. So how do you balance urgency with trust building in the work y'all are doing?
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining today. I'm Jonathan in the Central Virginia LISC office. We started our program 2 years ago in 2024, and everything that Sarah did, we hit those hurdles and those headaches very early on in our program. But similar to what Atlanta has done, our program was kind of birthed and launched out of a home repair program that had to say no to people because they did not have clear title. And we started with that initial list of those people who said no. And it was very apparent early on that they were figuring out who were we. We were bringing them, talking to them about clearing their title, and they wanted home repair. They needed home repair. So we were technically bringing a problem to them that many families may not have had the time or the space or even the emotional mental capacity to deal with at a time. So we had to quickly adjust our lens. Many times when you're working with grant funds or funds that are based in outcomes, you're against the clock, so you want to work with the list that you have, the pipeline that you've built. But we had to slow down and lead with education and lead with a community leader, a trusted partner, not just LISC or not just the Heirs Property Network. We had to talk to attorneys to figure out how we can engage them early and often. So that's how we approach this area of trust. We've since started education campaigns. We go to housing counseling events. We go to law events, community days to really show our name, show our face. We have brand recognition now, and that's how we kind of got over the trust factor.
Hey, thanks, Jonathan. I just want to add, I think I've heard you talk about the use of or leveraging HUD certified housing counseling agencies, financial coaches, folks in your municipal housing departments to help you disseminate the information. So just want to echo that, building on Colin's comment, it's about understanding sort of the right moment for the right message for the right household, right? If you can get those things lined up, data can help drive how that might unfold. And then it's all about who's saying it, right? Who's delivering the message to the folks. So with that, you mentioned home repair. So I'm going to go to Damon and ask Damon to chime in on how do you think about this work, Damon, as it relates to the home repair work y'all are doing and housing vulnerability at large?
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Jonathan, for that segue. So we really see home repair and heirs operating not as silos, but actually as programs that are actually together. I see it as our twofold approach around housing preservation. Having been in this space with LISC now for the last 10 years, and having stood up home repair programs now in Detroit, Memphis, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and get ready to launch in Charlotte, the story is the same. If I have Mrs. Jones who comes to the table and she's coming to us for a roof, likely there are other issues that we're going to get deeper off into, whether that top of mind is around heirs. We may have title challenges, which we see in all of our markets. We may have a situation where there's utility assist where she may need utility assistance, or she may even be in danger of property tax foreclosure. So these are all underlying issues that also impact their ability to be able to maintain the home. So like I said, heirs property and home repair, for me, they're synonymous and they go together. That's why, thanks to the support of US Bank, we've been able to replicate your model from Jacksonville and bring that to Cincinnati and Cleveland. And now we're also looking at a seed program in Memphis, because I feel strongly that the two, like I said, the two go together. You can't do home repair without heirs, and I feel like you can't do heirs without home repair, because they both are proactive approaches to helping homeowners be able to preserve their most important asset, which is, like I said, their home, whether that's through actually physical repairs to the home or through heirs, which is clearing up ownership, or making sure that we're proactive and that that mother, before she passes away, is able to have a will or estate plan so she can leave the hands and the heirs that come behind her.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, really important to think about where there's opportunity for synergies and building on existing work. Um, you know, one of the things, Sarah, coming back to you and thinking about this from your perspective is uh, having the ability to iterate and adapt as we go. So 3 years ago, this landscape looked a certain way in terms of who's involved and how that work unfolds. I'm curious if you want to share any reflections on how legal aids are thinking about this. How's NCLC thinking about this differently today than you were perhaps 2 or 3 years ago?
So I love that question, Christopher, because the work does evolve and it will keep evolving. And I think a few things come to mind. One is there is so much energy and focus around this issue right now. It's brought a lot of people into the mix. And one thing I love about the playbook and LISC's approach in general has been, let's all talk to each other. Let's bring everybody into this conversation. And you all have recognized in one of the pages on the playbook, you've got, Habitat for Humanity, LISC, the National Community Stabilization Trust, all of these different partners and allies that are doing the work. We will do it better if we talk to each other. And I think LISC has really been a leader on that. I know that being in Atlanta, where I live, LISC Atlanta has hosted these convenings where we're getting 25, 30 stakeholders to come, and they're showing up in person and talking about different pieces of it. What am I seeing and what are you seeing? And how do we create a flow that will be most efficient to marshal these great resources that are being put to bear? How do we then use it in the wisest possible way? And the other thing that really has risen to the surface for us is the policy lens, and that when you need the legal providers, you need the community outreach, but at the same time, while you're doing that work to help people actually clear up their title, file probate lawsuits, all of these things, at the same time, we've got to be talking to our policymakers about the risks that exist, because it will take a very long time to clear up all these titles one property at a time. In the meantime, we don't want thousands of heirs properties being lost to property tax foreclosure every year, or being unable to get homeowners insurance because they couldn't get a roof repaired, or unable to get FEMA assistance. So that is an important piece of it that I believe the playbook helps to crystallize is, let's also build our policy work with that information that we're learning as we serve this population.
Yeah, that's super important. Hearing you bring the policy piece into this, into focus, it's critically important. So Colin, coming back to you, building on that, right? We need the policy, we need the data. Let's look around the corner, Colin. What do you see? What else is out there in terms of innovative approaches? How should folks be thinking about this work to try to get ahead? We know that speed matters because we're seeing unprecedented capital velocity in a lot of low-to-mod housing markets. How do we compete? What are you thinking it through in terms of innovative approaches? Take it wherever you want to go with.
Totally. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's funny. I feel like a lot of times when people are talking about, heirs property policy, there's two worlds you can talk about, right? You can talk about the kind of often state level, sometimes federal level policies about, how heirs property gets created in the first place, partition laws, things like that. And then you've got the nuts and bolts, kind of to me more local. I'm in a municipality. And I remember being at a conversation, one of the convenings that have happened here in Atlanta over the past, it's been amazingly short. It's been really like a year that so much has happened here in terms of convenings. And I see some people on the call from Community Foundation and House ATL and LISC Atlanta and all those folks. So they've been instrumental in that. But one of the convenings, someone who was a lawyer, doing this work kind of said, listen, on the one hand, yeah, tangle title and resolving the title issues is important, but really at the end of the day, what's important is all the downstream effects that tangle title results in, right? And that to me was kind of a light bulb moment where it was like, yeah, you eliminate those downstream impacts by clearing up the title, but right now we can just go try to eliminate those downstream impacts one by one without handling the title. It's not going to solve the entirety of the problem, but it can, for lack of better words, stop the bleed. And so a lot of the innovations have been, honestly, first and foremost, identifying very commonly known vulnerabilities that we see, loss to property tax, foreclosure, loss to sometimes, someone getting in the chain of title and working their way through the rest of the process. And, to turn back to partnerships, just going and being like, okay, how exactly does this mechanism work? And where exactly can we loop in? Because oftentimes, it's not a Gordian knot that you need to like cut the knot to solve. It's like, oh no, just pull this thread and pull this thread. And we've gotten, 20% of the cases, resolved. We're working right now with our tax commissioner to make sure we have line of sight on, where property tax foreclosures are going to happen for the next 12 months. And that gives us an opportunity to intervene. And hopefully we get further and further upstream. And so really a lot of those on the first order, a lot of those innovations are, once you see the vulnerability, understand like really why it becomes a vulnerability and address it there. And oftentimes you can do it pretty decently. There's some other stuff on financing and unlocking capital to help support things, which we can get into. But I would say lessons learned in the last year is kind of that, like get specific.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's a really important point around tax escalation rates in neighborhoods that may also have other types of vulnerabilities, whether it be vacancy, or code enforcement or other types of municipal finance enforcement type actions. So how do we flip that, right, Colin? How do you flip municipal finance enforcement into signaling potential protection and preservation? At least that's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right, is to say we know pretty well where enforcement is happening. Well, let's go just double check and see what of that is heirs. And then now this is an opportunity to stop some of the things that result in loss of property, loss of home, loss of kind of family asset.
Yeah. So Jonathan, I'm wondering KPIs, right? People want to know, get the brass tacks. What outcomes are you looking for? How are you knowing you're making progress? What does that look like for Virginia? Is that case completion? Talk to us a little bit about that real quickly.
Yeah, I mean, Heirs property, everybody on the call is probably very aware. It's kind of separated in two different buckets. There's the prevention metrics that you want to stop more heirs cases from being tangled title, but then you also have the resolution side. And I think to build a successful program, you have to have two. When funders are looking at how to fund this work, number one, if you want to show outcomes, it's going to take a lot less time to write a will, to do an estate plan than it is to untangle a title. People have to understand that untangling a family title could take a very long time, but you also want to prioritize those families that you can serve and serve quickly. So being able to evaluate your landscape, whether that's who's doing heirs property in your community, who's doing wills clinics, what lawyers or attorneys are actively doing this work, and see if they are organized, have the capacity to be that backbone with support of another organization or funding. The other thing that is really interesting is figuring out where to start. Number one, the engagement, because data plays a big part. There could be, as Colin said, in Atlanta, targeted neighborhoods that are being enforced with tax liens, or there could be just vacant properties, as you said, that have been, why is this property vacant and how can we bring it back online? And I think once the data shows and highlights the number of either at risk or soon to be heirs property, that's an eye-opening at the number of land value and how to support bringing that property back online.
Yeah, so key KPIs we've seen, and I know we're coming in with the remaining few minutes here, and we'll wrap. Estate plans completed, equity preserved or tax assessed home value preserved or stabilized, time to resolution. So intake to case completion, right? Can we shorten the amount of time it takes for throughput? I mean, one of the things, Sarah, we're seeing is as more partners come together around shared sort of approach, then we're able to identify faster, find them, engage them faster, and then provide the customized support that will help reduce vulnerability over the long run. One fact, or let me mention two. One is in Jacksonville, we did a quick study in one neighborhood, Colin. We're seeing economic analysis show that when an heirs property is identified in a property in a block, it is reducing home values by 17% for that entire block. Okay, so that is a municipal finance threat. So we can reduce heirship concentration. We could perhaps help increase home values without involuntary displacement. That's one. The second one, Colin, I'll mention quickly is we looked at some tax data, property tax data, and found with one of our partners that 1 out of every 4 heirs properties, the property taxes are being paid for by an out-of-state heir. So that leads us to think about, okay, how are folks in terms of family and distance able to manage property? Is that sustainable? And how do you go forward? All of this is cutting through both urban, suburban, and rural landscapes. So we need to make clear about that. So I'm going to come back to my friend Damon for just a closing comment here on what you're seeing, Damon. And is there an importance around narrative and storytelling? Can you just comment on that from your perspective?
From my perspective, two things that I see. One, I just want to thank everybody on this panel for their work. One thing we are seeing, particularly an increase of, is deed fraud. Like we have a huge problem with that in Detroit. So I think, just to put that on people's radars and continuing to educate the public about this issue, because it's not just about getting them in the door, but there's so many layers that you have to go through first. So it really is about that upfront education piece, letting people know like, hey, that offer that you're getting from a investor about, hey, we would like to purchase your home for cash. We really need you to not go down that route, and here's why. Just because of, like I said, the loss of equity, the lack of stabilization in neighborhood. So just making sure that we continue to push that education piece, because it's so important. Getting this information out there by community partners, churches, ministries, billboards, webinars, social media, getting this information out about how important it is to make sure that your home is protected. Like I said, whether it's through a will, whether it's through an estate plan, or if it's not, here are the services that we can provide. But like I said, really highlighting the issue now about deed fraud and just making sure we continue to push that messaging out and being those trusted partners.
Hey, thanks, Damon. And folks want to hear from folks that they know and trust. And so to the extent that we can overwhelm the current public narrative with stories of folks being able to identify the issue, address it, and come out on the other side clean, we need to do more of that. Okay? You Google heirs property and pick your city, and you're likely to see stories of challenge. And it'll be great for all of us to come away today committed to doing something about changing that narrative, bending it towards redemption, bending it towards preservation and intergenerational wealth. Thank you, panel. You've been great. I'm going to turn it back over to David Greenberg.
Yes, thanks for those really powerful reflections. And clearly, the perspective that you provide, within local government, as an intermediary, bringing together community organizations, working on housing programs and legal services. These are all parts of the puzzle that the playbook is meant to bring together. And so we're grateful for our collaboration with you. And I would just want to start with, you know, given the different hats that you wear and the places that you represent on the community side, on the legal services side, on the government side, what do you see as barriers to collaboration across those kinds of entities, and how have you kind of worked to address them for greater coordination? In the places where you're doing this work.
So, David, I'll start and hope others will jump in from the panel. I think there are a few barriers that can be tricky to navigate. One is not knowing each other's language and approach, and sometimes, we're all somewhat siloed in the way we do our work, and so we don't always know how to reach out to each other or how to apply for funding together or create a collaboration. It can be difficult until we start to have those partnerships and figure out, okay, what does a contract look like? How many people can you serve with this amount of money? Um, and I also think that when it comes to local government players, one of the challenges that I've seen as we've partnered with folks around the country is sometimes it's getting the attention of local government and helping them to understand why it's important for them to address this issue. And of course, there are places like City of Atlanta where the government is fully attuned and I think has come to it with an openness. But I think in many places, local governments have a lot of demands that are being put on them, and they may think, we need people to pay their property taxes, we need people to do certain things that are required, but not realizing the way that their own systems and policies are creating barriers for heirs. And so there has to be this openness to dialogue and to jointly tackling these challenges. That's what I would say.
That's great, Sarah. And I'll jump in as well, just talking about those barriers. Oftentimes, many communities, different cultures do not engage with legal services at all. And the barrier sometimes here in Central Virginia is finding estate planners and attorneys that look and speak the language of that community has been a huge uplift. So there's a education from the community standpoint, but there needs to be more attorneys of all demographics that are in this work. And some schools are doing a great job introducing heirs property at an early stage at the college level and the law school level to estate planning heirs property, but we just need more diversity if we want to be more effective in more communities. And here in Virginia, we found that very early that we just need more BIPOC estate planners and lawyers in this work.
David, we're 44 minutes into this and nobody's mentioned AI. So let me do that and say machine learning, AI has to be a tool in the toolbox to help generate the kind of speed that we can compete with other actors in the informal housing market space. So if there's one thing I'd say, and the other thing I'd say is the value add we found in engaging universities and research and academics who are interested in this topic and helping simplify the complexity of it into bite-sized, understandable pieces that can then be turned into potential sort of experiments, innovative approaches and practices, and reducing risk. I guess that's the other thing I'd say. Risk reduction is something that we can lead with as we talk about this work that can bring people together around a particular rallying point, like reducing blight or increasing homeownership rates. We can all understand the fact that we need to reduce risk in order for partners from different perspectives to join in.
I'll just round out and kind of parrot a little bit what Sarah said. I've found that, especially when you're dealing with existing government bodies or public authorities or whoever, everyone's kind of got the thing that either by state statute they're required to do, or by their own kind of mission they're driven to do. And sometimes the work is just being able to translate the importance of this work into the language that they have in order to get, what they need. I might need data from the clerk, and so I need to understand what the clerk's motivating kind of orientation is and frame heirs property within that in order to establish that partnership. But that takes a few conversations sometimes to understand, okay, where can I get you to give me a green light? Where can I get you to give me a yellow light? Where's a red light? And so I think continuing to learn how each other talks, oftentimes you can find a winning, persuasive case for partnership just by speaking the right language.
Thanks. That's powerful, and it goes back, I think, to Sarah's point about yes, learning how everyone sees the problem. So there are specific languages that different stakeholders are going to use, but also I think, as Christopher said and Jonathan also amplified, it's possible to have a rallying cry that can bring people together around wealth preservation, around home ownership preservation, and certainly the issue of who is doing this representation matters for expanding trust. I want to come back to a question that was posed earlier in the chat, and it was, does the playbook apply to farmland and to rural areas? And I kind of answered it, that some of the principles seem to apply as you bring folks together to proactively address heirs property and prevent in the future. But I'm hoping the panelists might be able to expand a little bit on what their experiences are in different contexts, urban, rural, different kinds of cities where they have seen this play out for Damon or Christopher or others who see how coalitions are gathering in different contexts. Any reflections there, either on the rural urban question or just like how context really matters?
I think for me, I'll speak from the urban side, just going from the Detroit experience. I always say when your city is actively involved, I think that helps with the success. I know in Detroit, Councilman Benson was a strong proponent. He has been for about the last 2 to 3 years around the heirs property issue. And so he was able to galvanize energy around this within city council. Of course, when you get city councils involved, you get funding involved. When you get funding involved, then you're able to bring in other partners to the table. So I think doing this work without having your city involved, I think it's a heavy lift. So I think if you are working with your city, or like I said, your city is an advocate of it, I think it helps in terms of just your overall success rate and being able to roll the program out and the viability with the public. Detroit has been very aggressive about heirs property workshops for about the last year to year and a half. And now we have council members who have been doing a series now of deed fraud workshops. We have one coming up. I just got an e-blast about probably within the next couple of days. So, like I said, having that presence, particularly from a resident perspective, that helps you with your messaging in terms of having a trusted partner because you have your local official there who's at the table.
Yeah, David, I just would comment on the idea that given the sprawling nature of a lot of our metro areas, that this issue shows up as you look at migration patterns. And so in Jacksonville, someone living an hour out actually is driving into Jacksonville every day to work, and yet where they live, they don't have access to free civil legal support. And so to the extent that Jacksonville can actually make available access to free civil legal supports and or financial coaching or other tools to help folks make informed decisions about the future and family security issues, then that's a piece of connective tissue. One of the ways we've been able to do that is through working with our regional planning councils. They understand the opportunity here to help outlying counties, small rural counties, think about how we're all in this particular issue in a similar way. It's all affecting us. And so to the extent we can think about travel sheds, migration patterns, it's clear to us that when we look at Baker County and some of the other counties in the outlying area of Northeast Florida, they benefit from the way in which Jacksonville is beginning to show leadership on this issue, and they can follow suit in their own way. Okay. So that's a bit of an answer to your question, but it's the point is how can we find common cause to some extent what Colin was talking about? How can you speak the language of that particular government entity or department in a way that draws them in and sees the shared benefit of taking on this work.
And if I can just add one more point to what's been said, all of which I think is right on point. I think that the way we see heirs property occurring, we know it's occurring in urban contexts, in rural, and in suburban, and there's a huge amount of overlap in the issues that come up in all of those contexts. There may be certain things that are more prevalent with heirs property in cities versus heirs properties in rural areas. Like, for example, more heirs in cities have a mortgage. There's a mortgage on the property potentially, and they have to deal with that mortgage. And maybe in the rural areas, it's more prevalent for it to be a large tract of land where, there's farming or there's forestry or there's other potential ability to generate income. And so how do you work out that aspect of it? But I think the playbook is really flexible enough that it can be useful in all of these contexts. And I also hear an invitation from LISC as we engage with these materials to say if we think there are other things that could be added for any particular context.
David, family dynamics occur everywhere. Okay, so everybody's got some form of a kitchen table, some living room where this conversation is going to happen. All right. And so I know our dear friends at Asset Funders Network, Dr. Karam Neal, has done a lot of work around mediation and helping folks understand how to unpack some of these issues in the midst of, quite frankly, a challenging moment, a loss, or a shock. And so I'd say that is one area where there's opportunity for, across terrains, folks can think about how might we work together? How do we help families have these very challenging and difficult conversations in ways that folks can come away whole and also protect family assets?
Right. We've been talking about policy and systems. We've been talking about regional collaborations, but there's a very human element to all of these dimensions that also has to be addressed, especially as people decide where their family land or family home is going to go and how it's going to be supported. We had a question sort of like, I think it's parallel to the urban rural question. It's about, how does it matter and what do we know about heirs property programs in tribal and indigenous lands?
So, David, I'm really glad this issue got raised because I feel like it's one of those things where we often will sort of put it to one side and say, this is a different enough context. We know that the issue arises there, but we're not sure how to tackle it. I think one observation I would make is that heirs property issues arise on tribal lands, and it will have all of the features that we see in any other place, but also the additional layer of the complicated way that we allow people to own land on tribal territories. And there are many complexities there and things that, I'm just beginning to learn about. But I do think that HAC, the Housing Assistance Council, in the work that they've been doing around heirs property, has brought a nice, deep exploration into the way that this issue comes up in tribes and territories. And I would love for us for the community that's working on this to continue to go deeper there, because it does require this additional knowledge of how trust lands work and, how things are inherited and a number of different, both federal laws and tribal laws as well.
Yeah, thank you. So we will be sending out both a recording of this webinar and also as there are questions that are kind of specific to or idiosyncratic to one place, we'll be providing some answers as we blast out notes from this. Um, David Longoria, I'm wondering if you might help us wrap up this excellent conversation.
Uh, Happy to do that, David, and thank you again to everybody for taking the time to join us and to our panel of experts for their insights. We realize we didn't get to everybody's questions, but as David mentioned, we will be sending a follow-up, and we do hope that today's conversation is really just a starting point. As we wrap up, I really want to return to where we started. Heirs property work is not just about legal processes or housing policy. It's about preserving generational wealth, stabilizing communities, and honoring the legacies of families who built and sustained neighborhoods over time. The playbook is really intended to support local leaders, whether that's a community-based organization, a legal aid partner, a coalition, or a public agency, in coordinating the work so families don't have to navigate complex systems alone. So, with that in mind, we invite you to explore the playbook, share it with partners, adapt it to your local context, and most importantly, help us continue improving it. Because this work will only succeed if it's collaborative, locally grounded, and informed by the communities it serves. On behalf of LISC, the Community Research and Impact Team, the Institute for Community Power, and our partners at the National Consumer Law Center, and everybody on the panel today. Thank you so much for the work you're doing and for joining us today. We look forward to continuing this conversation with you. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.